Hi students, I am making a video for you related to our work together in 102H. Um, I am giving you this video in advance because some of the things that I designed as an exercise I realized would be best accomplished remotely between people in cohorts because we're talking about the problem of theodicy. In other words, why do bad things happen to good people? In the story of Job, we have a very sinister example of a problem, which it starts out in a way that, as a Christian, I find deeply distressing because the devil gets into heaven and God says to the devil, have you considered my servant Job? He really does everything right. And the devil says that's because you bless him and he would curse you if you stopped giving him all this blessing, basically. And God gives the devil permission to mess with Job's circumstances, but not the person of him himself. Although he himself is sick on top of in a sudden moment losing everything. I do not like the idea of the devil going and making a bet with God, which is basically what we're looking at. I don't like it at all, and yet there it is in the Bible. So the problem of theodicy is looked at here. This is not a theological class, and I want to emphasize once more: your belief in this story at any level is in no way required of you participating in this exercise. We are looking at this Bible book as an extraordinary literary form. And we are going to examine the problem of theodicy and divine intervention in this story. Here is some general information about the Bible. It's really not a book, it's a collection of books that were not written in one sitting or one century, even, but over numerous centuries. The three languages in which the Bible that we've received over time is recorded in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. And we see the Bible is written in multiple genres, including the poetry of the Psalms, epistles, letters, prose narrative, and law books. So it's a multiple genre document. And uh, what human committed it to the page, the book of Job, is a question that we would want to understand. We have suspicions rather than factual information. I have removed my face from the video because I needed to be able to speak to you um, without covering the words that I had on the page so you couldn't read them. All three holy book religions consider that the words of the book of Job are inspired by God. Um, and we have certain kinds of attributions associated with different parts of the Bible. Leviticus is attributed to Moses, which is a law book, as Deuteronomy, another law book, is attributed to the Deuteronomic scribes, which were a group of people who were essentially guardians of Jewish law. Nehemiah, not surprisingly, is attributed to Nehemiah. And if you read the book of Psalms and the book of Proverbs, there are certain attributions of different ones, or different chapters. For instance, King Lemuel and his mother are supposed to be the authors of Proverbs 31. King David and King Solomon are associated with both Proverbs and Psalms. And Ecclesiastes is directly attributed to King Solomon's voice. The Gospels and the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are effectively supposed to be the people who have recorded the stories from the Bible. Um, And all the epistles are clearly attributed to someone in particular. However, we know that not all, scholars are not certain that for instance, that the Pauline epistles were all written specifically by Paul, but rather under Paul. In other words, Paul's in charge and someone writes something down and he says, yeah, that. The way that almost like a politician might have a speechwriter on staff. But these are letters that are certainly attributed to and endorsed by the writers of them. And the book of Revelation is attributed to a man simply known as John the Revelator, who the story goes he was they attempted to kill him by boiling him in oil as a Christian martyr, and he survived, and they didn't quite know what to do with the man they couldn't kill, so they threw him on the island of Patmos, and then he started having visions. But Job is not attributed to a specific writer or scribe. And one of the reasons is that it seems to be much older than its initial commission to a scroll. In other words, the story probably predates the people who wrote it down, who may have adapted its style, which is one of the interesting things for us as literary scholars. Scholars believe that the person was familiar with two traditions of non-Jewish Middle Eastern writing, because this is probably written down not just in Israel, but during the Babylonian captivity, something I'll get to in a minute, because you may be scratching your head saying, what's the Babylonian captivity? Ugaritic and Canaanite narratives were pagan or non-Jewish narrative styles, which this book seems to resemble in its structure. And so when was Job written? Hi, I put my face back. The Jews have a tradition that Job was a distant relative of Abraham, who came from the Babylonian city of Ur, which, given the Babylonian captivity, would be an interesting idea for who else may have preserved the story. He's a man who would have been a little bit like the priest of Melchizedek, who kind of appears out of nowhere and in Genesis, who's really not mentioned in the story of the covenant with Yahweh, with God, but seems to be a worshiper nonetheless. And the story may have circulated for up to from about the time of Abraham, about 4,000 years ago. The Babylonian captivity is centuries later. And that's really quite interesting that would be so. I made my face go away because I wanted to give you all the words that were on the page. When was this written down? It wasn't written down in Abraham's day, because Hebrew as a written language had not been invented in Abraham's day. Some think it might have been during the Mosaic period, meaning not mosaics on the wall, but from Moses. The language was just getting established then, and other people think that Solomon may have written it because he was a really good writer, and people are pretty sure that they know that. But it does seem to have come from the Babylonian captivities, and that would be when the Jews have to leave Zion because they are taken away as slaves by the Babylonian king. And the books that are associated with the Babylonian captivity very directly are Daniel, for instance, and the book of Esther. There are suggestions here that this may be from that time, and part of that is related to the literary style that I mentioned before, the non-Jewish traditions that seem to have informed not the meaning but structure of the story. So the Jews were effectively enslaved again after Egypt in Babylon about 2,750 years ago. But understand that their slavery was by no means menial exclusively. I'm sure there were people who had to do laundry who were captured by the Babylonians. But I would tell you that some rose to very high positions within the feudal style Babylonian court. And Hadassah Esther seems to have become one of the queens of a Babylonian king. But they didn't assimilate. In fact, the whole point of the writings of this period are about the Jews not assimilating. They maintained and developed a couple of distinct languages at this time. They maintained Hebrew, which had been in existence for at least 1,000 years prior to this. And then they develop Aramaic, which is still used by Talmudic scholars, which is kind of a hybrid language between Babylonian and Hebrew, the way that Yiddish is a combination of Hebrew and German. I don't know how much you know about Jewish languages, but I personally find this fascinating. This ability to hybridize one's own language. It's a little like Spanglish, but Spanglish if Spanglish were a scholarly language. During this time, if not before it, Jewish culture developed a tradition of universal manhood literacy as a way to preserve the culture. And in fact, one of the requirements to be a man within Judaism is to get up in front of the congregation of a synagogue and read from the Torah. And only when one can prove that one reads the cultural language is one declared legally within Jewish law a man. Today, women also are part of this tradition and have what's called bat mitzvahs. But the tradition dates back far further than the tradition of bat mitzvahs. We believe it may be as old as the Babylonian captivity itself. And then the transcription of Job may have occurred during these cultural developments. In other words, the story had been kind of rattling around as an oral tradition, and in order to preserve the culture, someone may have decided to write it down, but they changed how the story was told from the very traditional story. And it has the elegant structure of a sophisticated rhetorical debate, which is why it is interesting to us. And it certainly falls smack dab into our conversation for this class about divine intervention. And debate, not absolute certainty, is the cornerstone of Jewish Talmudic tradition. Let me explain what the heck I mean. It is considered the height of respect to go up to a rabbi and ask him a very difficult question. And if he is participating in the Jewish tradition, he will return the compliment by asking the person who asked him the difficult question a question and response that offers a twist in the perspective on what has been asked. In other words, he is saying, in order for me to get specific with you, we need to define something yet further, and these may be beyond the reach of human understanding. I cannot express to you how much this is a spectator sport in New York. If you go to the right neighborhood on a Saturday, people after synagogue will come out and someone will say, Rabbi, is it not true that such and such? And people will gather and people will listen. They want to hear what the rabbi is going to say. And then the rabbi will often respond, well, before I answer that, let me ask you this. And people go, oh, it's so cool. If you can ever do that, it would be wonderful. And to tell you the truth, the Aramaic books of the Talmud are so fascinating. I would so love to understand it myself. If I had a whole other lifetime, I would learn Aramaic and I'd read the Talmud, just because so much interesting stuff is in there about arguments, debates, about what it means to be human. And I'm deeply interested, even though I am not a Jew but a Christian, I find this utterly fascinating. So The third unanswered question is, who among these mortals in Job's story wins the debate? There's this debate, but who among the mortals wins? They all have these theories that you're going to talk about in this exercise about why Job has all this bad stuff happen to him, even though God himself, so we know it's true. For the purpose of the story, God himself says Job's a great guy and he does what I want. So why is he getting his life messed up by these circumstances? Who wins the debate? And here's the only one who can win the debate. God answers Job out of the whirlwind. Why has he been so afflicted? But God answers Job and doesn't provide a logical response. We all want a logical response. My goodness, when bad things happen to good people, we want someone to be able to tell us because ... and we all go, oh, that makes so much sense. But that's not what God does. He answers Job with other questions, lots and lots of other questions, which makes you know this is a Jewish story based on what I just said, but also one that is at once gorgeous and perplexing and frustrating. So what in fact is God's answer? The answer for it comes in the form of the questions he asks. And what does he ask about? Everything else but what Job is asking. All right, I'm dividing you up into this group exercise. Let me go through it briefly. Cohort 1, you are in charge of explaining why Job says bad things happen to good people, if he indeed says anything, and Eliphaz, one of his comforters. And by the way, if you need, with friends like this, who needs enemies? Cohort 1, you're in charge of Job and Eliphaz. Cohort 2, you are in charge of Bildad and Zophar, two of Job's comforters who have some theories that they say they have multiple speeches in the story, in the debate, about why bad things happen to good people. You have to report back to us as a class. And cohort 3, you're in charge of Elihu, great I am, Yahweh, God. What does he say? Why do bad things happen to good people? You have to explain to us what it is that God says. Good luck with that. Good luck with all of it. It's really hard, but I feel about this the way that I'm describing the people who are standing outside the synagogue going, oh, I think it's so cool we're having this exercise. Here is my recommendation. I have some notes about what groups should do. You have the emails of your cohort. You have your marching orders. Before we meet together in class, I want you to have at least a Google Chat meeting about this and come up with your answers. This is like a homework assignment for you. I'm going to also send you all an email about this, and you can see the video. I wanted to give you the background. And again, maybe we should all, in my next iteration of this class, read some Talmud, because it'll mess with your head. It'll make you look cross-eyed, and then you'll say, that's brilliant! It's so much fun. So, all right, you have your marching orders, and I will see you in class. What did I write here? Oh, yes, I say stuff. Someone should take notes, review the words of your group's character in the text of Job, and then figure out who's going to be your spokesperson and what is your character's theory about why Job was afflicted, and quote 2 passages to support that view. And if that character is right about why bad things happen to good people, what is the larger implications for humanity of those assertions? You didn't know you were going to a yeshiva this semester. Yeshiva is a Jewish theological institution. And I am highly unqualified to be your rabbi because I'm not even Jewish. But this is a really cool, continuous, and still living debate about the very center of what this class is interested in. I'm not requiring you to believe in God, but I am absolutely requiring you to believe in the power of rhetorical debate between people and to be part of that conversation. So if I seem excited, it's because I'm super excited. I'm like all pearl clutchy. See here, my pearls, and I'm clutching them. Yay for us. I'll see you in class.